I still remember the night of the 14th of October, 1979. The smell of disinfectant filled the hospital corridor, the white walls glaring under flickering tube lights. I had just given birth a baby girl, my first. My hands trembled when the nurse placed that tiny bundle on my chest. Her skin was soft as silk, and her faint cry, "Oh," it melted every corner of my soul. I whispered, "My little angel, my Mary." At that moment, I believed my world had turned perfect, but I had no idea that the very person I trusted most, my own sister, was about to destroy that world, piece by piece. My sister, Clara, was older by 3 years. People always said she was the prettier one, green eyes, golden hair, the kind of beauty that turned heads in every room. But what they never saw was the jealousy simmering behind those smiles. She had been married for 6 years then, and despite all her desperate prayers, she couldn't conceive. She envied me for everything: my quiet husband Thomas, my little home, my growing belly. Yet, in her words, she was thrilled for me. I believed her, foolishly. Clara came to visit me in the hospital the next morning. I was half asleep, exhausted but glowing. She leaned over my bed, looking down at my baby with a peculiar smile. "She's beautiful," she said softly, though her eyes didn't match her words. They scanned Mary's face too long, as if memorizing every detail. She touched her tiny fingers, her cheeks, then looked at me and said, "You're so lucky, Anne." There was something sharp about how she said it, like envy dressed as love. I brushed it off. I was too happy, too tired, too naive. That afternoon, while the nurse took Mary for her routine check, Clara insisted I rest. "You need sleep, Annie," she said, tucking the blanket over me. "I'll check on the baby. Don't worry." I smiled and closed my eyes. God forgive me, I didn't know that was the last time I'd see my real daughter for more than 40 years. When I woke up, the nurse wheeled in the baby cart. "Here's your little girl," she said cheerfully. I reached for her, still half dazed, and kissed her forehead. But something felt off. Her hair looked darker. Her nose wasn't quite the same. "She looks different," I murmured, but the nurse just laughed. "Oh, newborns change every hour," she said. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe nothing had changed except me being a silly, emotional new mother. So I swallowed my doubt and raised that child as my own. For years, I loved her like the air I breathed. She grew into a strong, willful girl with a streak of stubbornness that reminded me of Clara. We called her Mary still, and she became the center of our lives. But as time passed, strange things started to happen. Every family gathering, Clara would watch Mary with this haunting expression, part fascination, part guilt. Once, I caught her crying in the kitchen, clutching Mary's photo. When I asked what was wrong, she just shook her head and whispered, "Nothing, just tired." I didn't press her. Sisters share silences more than words sometimes. But her eyes, those trembling eyes, stayed with me for years. Then, one Christmas, when Mary was 8, Clara's husband left her. He couldn't bear her obsession with children anymore. She'd been to doctors, priests, even healers, hoping for a miracle, but it never came. Around that time, she started visiting us more often, bringing gifts for Mary, insisting on babysitting her for hours. My husband found it odd. "She's too attached," he warned. "It's not healthy." But I defended her. "She's just lonely," I said. "Let her love Mary. It helps her heal." How ironic those words sound now. As Mary grew older, she started to look nothing like me or Thomas. People would politely comment, "She has your sister's smile," or "She looks just like Clara's side of the family." I laughed it off, but each time something inside me twisted tighter. I told myself genetics were strange, that resemblances could skip generations. Still, the unease lingered like a quiet ghost. It was in 2019, 40 years later, when the truth came crashing down. Mary, now grown and married, had taken one of those online DNA tests for fun. "It'll be interesting to trace our roots, Mom," she said. I smiled and agreed. We expected some Scottish or Irish heritage results, nothing more. But 2 weeks later she came to my house, pale and trembling. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking, "it says, 'You're not my biological mother.'" I laughed at first. "Oh, sweetheart, those tests make mistakes." But her eyes, my God, her eyes were full of fear and confusion. "It matched me with someone else," she whispered. "A woman named Clara Harrison." The room spun. I remember gripping the edge of the kitchen table as my knees went weak. Clara, my sister, my own blood. The truth clawed its way out of the shadows I'd buried for decades. My mind flashed back to that hospital room, to the way Clara had insisted I rest, to her strange smile, to that baby who looked different. I gasped so hard I could barely breathe. "No," I whispered. "No, she wouldn't. She couldn't. But she did. I called her that night." My voice was trembling so violently I could hardly form words. "Clara," I said, "Mary took a DNA test. It matched her to you. Tell me it's wrong." Silence. Then a long, broken sob on the other end. She said my name, Anne, in that old soft voice, and I knew. Every wall of denial I'd built collapsed in an instant. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was desperate. You had what I couldn't. When the nurse took your baby, I switched the tags. I thought I'd just hold her for a while, feel what it's like, but when I looked at her, I couldn't let go. I swapped them, Anne. I raised your daughter as mine." The world turned into noise. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear her confess the rest, how she'd bribed the night nurse, how she'd switched the ID bands, how my real baby was sent home with her and raised under my nose as her niece. My whole life, every memory, every photograph, every laugh, built on a lie crafted by the person I trusted most. I didn't speak for days after that. I'd sit on the porch, staring at the sky, replaying every moment since 1979, the way Mary had never liked my cooking, the way she gravitated toward Clara as a child, the way I'd dismissed those subtle tugs in my heart that whispered something wasn't right. All of it, every instinct I'd buried had been screaming the truth all along. And now, after 40 years, my real daughter, my flesh and blood, was somewhere out there, living a life that was never meant to be hers, raised by the woman who stole her from me. The night Clara confessed, I sat on the floor of my living room, clutching the phone even after she hung up. My fingers were stiff, my heart numb. 40 years of lies had unfolded in less than 5 minutes. I didn't even know whether to scream, cry, or just stop existing. I could still hear her voice echoing in my head. I switched the tags. I couldn't let go. I stared at the family photographs on the wall, birthdays, school dances, graduations, all with the child I thought was mine. My Mary, the girl who had called me Mom every day of her life. The girl whose scraped knees I'd kissed, whose tears I'd wiped, whose laughter had filled my empty spaces. She wasn't my child, and somewhere the baby that was mine had grown up calling my sister Mother. Sleep abandoned me that night. My mind wandered back to that hospital room in 1979. I remembered how the nurse's voice trembled when she handed me the baby the next morning, how Clara had rushed to help, how her perfume lingered near the crib when I woke up. My heart clenched. All those strange moments, all those uneasy dreams over the years, they weren't madness. They were memories whispering the truth. By morning, I couldn't bear the silence anymore. I called Clara again. She didn't answer. I tried her home line, her cell phone, even her workplace number. Nothing. I drove to her house despite my shaking hands and pounding heart. When she opened the door, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was messy, her eyes swollen red. For the first time in my life, I saw her not as my proud, perfect sister, but as a broken woman haunted by what she'd done. Why? I asked. My voice was barely a whisper. Why would you do this to me? To both of us? Tears spilled down her cheeks as she motioned for me to sit. I didn't plan it, Anne, she said, trembling. When I saw your baby, something inside me snapped. I'd spent years praying for one. And then she was just there, pink, warm, crying. I told myself I'd just hold her, just feel that moment once. But then the nurse came in, and I panicked. I bribed her to change the tags, told her we'd fix it later. But later never came. I brought your baby home and told Richard she was ours. My whole body went cold. And what about mine? What about the baby you gave me? She's mine too, she sobbed. You raised her better than I ever could. Don't you see? We both loved them. Just the wrong way. I slapped the table so hard she flinched. You stole my life, Clara. You watched me love your child while you hid mine from me. Every birthday, every visit, you looked me in the eye and said nothing. Nothing. She crumbled, burying her face in her hands. I was ashamed. Every time I tried to tell you, I couldn't breathe. I thought maybe I could undo it somehow, but the years kept passing, and you looked so happy. I didn't want to destroy you. Destroy me? I whispered. You already did. We sat there for hours, crying, two old women bound by one monstrous secret. She told me my real daughter's name was Grace, Grace Harrison, a school teacher living 2 towns away, married, with 2 children of her own. I'd seen her before in photographs on Clara's wall, in Christmas cards signed, Love, Grace, and Family. I used to comment how she looked like me. The irony nearly broke me in half. I drove home in silence, my heart heavier than it had ever been. When I walked into my house, I found Mary sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for me. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Is it true? She asked, her voice trembling. Did Aunt Clara really? I didn't have the strength to lie. I nodded. She gasped softly, tears spilling again. So she's my real mother? My mouth went dry. Biologically, yes. But I raised you, Mary. You're my daughter. Nothing will ever change that. She stood there, shaking her head, whispering, "My whole life's been a lie." Then she turned and left before I could stop her. I wanted to run after her, to hold her and tell her none of it mattered, but my legs wouldn't move. I sank into a chair and cried like a wounded child. For the next few days, the whole family shattered into confusion. My husband, Thomas, who was long gone by then, buried years before, couldn't help me through this. I was alone, dealing with 2 daughters who weren't where they belonged, and a sister drowning in guilt. Mary avoided me for weeks. When she finally called, her voice was distant. "I met her," she said. "I met Clara. She showed me pictures of her holding me as a baby. I don't know how to feel. She's my mother, but so are you." That sentence cut me deeper than any knife could. I asked her, "Did you meet Grace?" She hesitated, then said, "No, not yet. She wasn't ready." But I was. I found Grace's address from the school website where she taught. My hands trembled as I parked outside her house. Through the window I saw her laughing with her husband and kids. She looked so much like I did when I was younger, same eyes, same quiet smile, my real daughter, my flesh and blood, raised under my sister's roof. I stood at her gate for nearly 10 minutes before I had the courage to ring the bell. When she opened the door, she smiled politely. "Can I help you?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened. "Grace," I whispered, my eyes filling with tears. "I'm Anne. Your mother." Her smile faded. "Excuse me?" "Please," I said, voice trembling. "I know how this sounds, but your mother, Clara, she's my sister. There was a mix-up. No, a switch at the hospital in 1979. You were mine." Her face went pale as snow. She didn't say anything for several seconds, then whispered, "That's not funny." "I'm not joking," I said, pulling out the printed DNA results Mary had sent me. "This proves it." She took the papers with shaking hands, scanning the lines as tears welled in her eyes. "Oh my God," she breathed. No, she wouldn't. She couldn't. But she did." She stepped aside slowly, inviting me in. We sat in silence, 2 strangers bound by blood and tragedy. I told her everything, how I found out, how Clara confessed, how my world crumbled overnight. Grace cried quietly, covering her face. All these years, I wondered why Aunt Anne looked at me with such love. I always felt something different around you, like a warmth I couldn't explain. We both cried, then 2 lost souls robbed of time. But it wasn't over, because the next day, Clara was found collapsed in her home. The phone call came early in the morning. I remember because the sun hadn't even risen yet, and my heart had been restless all night. When it rang, I froze. Some part of me already knew it was bad news. It was Clara's neighbor, her voice trembling. "Anne, I found your sister unconscious. The ambulance is on the way." By the time I reached the hospital, she was alive barely. Tubes and wires tangled around her like vines, machines humming in the dimly lit ICU. The same hospital where it all began in 1979. I stood at the foot of her bed, my chest aching as I watched her pale face. For all her sins, she was still my sister, my only family left from our childhood, and I hated myself for still loving her despite everything she had done. She opened her eyes slowly, as if waking from a long nightmare. "Anne," she whispered, voice cracked and broken. "Is she Grace, does she know?" I nodded. "She knows." Tears rolled down her temples. "I never wanted it to end this way. You had 40 years to make it right," I said quietly. 40 years, Clara." Her hand twitched weakly toward mine. "I wanted to tell you so many times. When Grace had her first tooth, her first steps, her first heartbreak, every moment, I thought of you. I thought of how you should have been there." She coughed, wincing. "But every time I saw you with Mary so happy, I told myself silence was mercy." I shook my head. "Mercy?" I whispered bitterly. "You call this mercy? You robbed us both." She closed her eyes, her breathing shallow. "Please, tell Grace I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her." I squeezed her hand as the monitors beeped faster. Nurses rushed in, ushering me out. I stood in the hallway, numb, listening to the muffled chaos inside. Then came the long, flat tone. That sound, I'll never forget it. She was gone. I didn't cry at first. I couldn't. It felt as if all my tears had been used up in the years before. But when they wheeled her body past me, a strange mixture of grief and rage surged inside me. My sister, my betrayer, my blood had taken my baby and carried the truth to her grave. The funeral was small, quiet, just family. Grace came, her face pale, her eyes distant. She stood at the edge of the crowd, not with me. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but I didn't know how. I was a stranger to her. After the burial, she approached me. "She left me a letter," Grace said softly. I stared at her. "What did it say?" Grace hesitated, then handed me a folded envelope, its paper yellowed with age. My name was written on the front in Clara's familiar handwriting, Anne. My fingers trembled as I opened it. "My dearest sister, if you are reading this, I am gone. I know you will never forgive me, but please try to understand. I did it out of a kind of love twisted by pain. You always had everything I wanted, happiness, warmth, motherhood, and I was drowning in emptiness. When I saw your baby, I thought God was giving me a chance to feel whole. But I took what wasn't mine, and every day since, I've paid for it. I watched you raise Mary and envied your peace. I raised Grace and loved her, but every time she smiled, I saw your face in hers. There's a box in my attic inside our hospital papers, baby photos, and one more thing. A locket I took from your hospital bag the day it happened. It belongs to your daughter. Give it to her. Tell her who she truly is. Forgive me if you can. I never meant to steal your life, only to borrow it for a moment, but that moment lasted forever. Your sister, Clara, by the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. Grace stood silently beside me. I looked at her, at the woman who should have grown up calling me Mom, and I saw my own features reflected back. It was like looking in a mirror that had been lost for 40 years. I went to Clara's house a few days later. The air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. In the attic, under a pile of old boxes, I found the one she mentioned. Inside were yellowed photographs, hospital bracelets, baby blankets, documents marked with both our names, and there it was, a tiny silver locket engraved with the letter A. Inside it was a baby's picture, mine, and on the other side, a lock of dark hair tied with thread. I clutched it to my chest and cried until my body gave out. When I returned home, I called Grace. "Would you come over?" I asked. My voice trembled, but she agreed. That evening, she sat in my living room, the same place where I'd rocked Mary to sleep, where family portraits hung in crooked rows. I handed her the locket. "This was yours," I said. "It was with me in the hospital that day." Clara took it. She opened it slowly, staring at the tiny photograph. Her lips trembled. "That's you?" she whispered. "Yes," I said softly. "That's me. And you were the baby in my arms until she took you." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She leaned forward, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to feel. I love her. She was my mother. But she lied to me. And you're my real mother. But I don't know you." "I know," I whispered. "We were both robbed. But we still have time, Grace. Maybe not to erase the past, but to start a new one." For a long moment she just stared at me, torn between grief and hope. Then she reached out and held my hand. Her touch was warm, familiar, somehow. We sat there in silence, the weight of 4 lost decades pressing between us. But healing doesn't come easy. Mary couldn't forgive Clara even after her death. "She ruined everything," she said. "I don't even know who I am anymore. Am I your daughter or hers?" "You're mine," I told her firmly. "Always will be. But so is Grace. Blood doesn't cancel love, Mary. It just complicates it." She didn't reply, but I saw the hurt in her eyes. Weeks passed, and slowly, the 3 of us, me, Grace, and Mary, began to rebuild something fragile but real. We met for dinners, shared old photos, laughed through tears. I learned that Grace's favorite color was blue, that she hummed when she cooked, that her handwriting looked exactly like mine when I was her age. And every time I looked at her, I saw what could have been all the birthdays, hugs, and lullabies stolen from us. Yet, amidst the pain, there was a strange kind of peace too, because at last the truth, however cruel, was out, and the ghosts that had haunted our family for 40 years were finally laid to rest. The months that followed were strange, quiet, but heavy, like the pause between 2 storms. I tried to keep things normal, but how could anything be normal when my entire motherhood had been rewritten by fate's cruel hands? Each morning, I'd wake up thinking of Grace, what she might be doing, how she might be feeling, and then I'd remember that for 40 years, those were the thoughts Clara used to have about my child. It was a circle of pain neither of us had escaped in life. Sometimes I'd catch myself walking into the spare room where I had placed the little box of Clara's things, the locket, the photographs, the hospital bracelets, all the evidence of a crime disguised as sisterly love. There were nights I sat there, holding that locket, whispering to the baby I once lost and the woman she'd become. I prayed for peace for both of them, Mary and Grace. Mary visited less often. Her eyes had changed since the truth came out. They carried something distant, suspicious, like she was afraid of losing her place in my heart. "You love her more now, don't you?" she asked one evening when she stopped by unannounced. Her tone was sharp, almost accusing. "Mary," I sighed, "how could you even think that?" "You've been spending time with her," she snapped. "You call her, visit her." "You never did that with me." I looked at her long and hard. "That's not true, and you know it. You're my daughter in every way that matters. I raised you. I fed you, loved you, protected you. Nothing can undo that." She turned away, arms crossed. "But she's your real one, isn't she? By blood." I took a deep breath, my heart aching. If blood alone made a mother, Clara would have been one. But she wasn't. Love is what makes it real, Mary. You are my child because I loved you when I didn't have to question it. For a moment, she looked at me with tears pooling in her eyes, but pride kept her from breaking. She nodded stiffly and said, I don't know who I am anymore." Then she left. I sat there in silence, long after the door closed. That was the price of truth. It doesn't heal. It cuts first, deep and wide. A week later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My hands trembled as I read. "You don't know me, but I've known you my whole life. My mother told me everything before she died. I don't blame you, but I can't forgive her either. I'd like to meet if you're ready. Grace." I clutched the note to my chest, tears blurring the ink. She wanted to see me again. We met at a small cafe by the lake, the kind with old wooden chairs and a faint smell of coffee beans and rain. When she walked in, the whole place seemed to go still. She had my posture, my quietness, even the same way of tucking her hair behind her ear. I saw myself at 25, and my breath caught in my throat. She smiled softly. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure I'd be able to stand if I didn't," I replied. We talked for hours about childhoods that weren't ours, about the small coincidences that suddenly made sense, the way she'd always felt closer to me than to Clara, the strange familiarity that used to confuse her as a child. "She always said you were her best friend," Grace whispered. "She told me you were kind, patient, everything she wasn't. I used to wish you were my mother sometimes. I guess part of me already knew. I couldn't hold back any more." Tears spilled down my cheeks as I reached across the table and took her hand. "You were mine, Grace. You are mine. We can't fix the years we lost, but I'll love you for the years we have left." She squeezed my hand, and in that moment I felt something break open inside me, a mixture of grief and relief, love and loss, entwined like roots of the same tree. After that day, Grace became part of my life in small, careful steps. She'd call me on weekends. bring her children to visit sometimes. The first time her little girl called me Grandma Ann, my heart nearly burst. I smiled through tears, realizing that even though time had robbed me, life was giving me a second chance. Still, the shadows of the past lingered. Every family gathering felt heavy, like we were performing a fragile dance around old wounds. Grace and Mary met for the first time at my house. I was terrified it would turn into a storm. They sat across from each other, silent for what felt like hours. Then Mary broke the ice. "So, you're me," she said awkwardly. Grace gave a sad smile. "And you're me." They both laughed softly, a nervous, bittersweet laugh that loosened the air a little. For the next hour, they talked about growing up, about Clara, about me. There were tears, a few harsh words, but also a strange sense of understanding. They weren't rivals. They were victims of the same cruel twist of fate. When they left that evening, I stood by the window, watching them walk to their cars, two women linked by a single act of betrayal neither of them chose. For the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, our family could survive this. But then came the news that reopened every wound. A lawyer contacted me a month later, saying Clara had left behind a sealed box to be opened only after her death. He said it contained important information about the children. My heart sank as I signed the documents to receive it. At home, I placed the box on the table. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them written over the years. Some were addressed to me, some to Grace, some even to Mary. In one, dated 1985, she wrote, "I thought of telling the truth today, but I couldn't. Anne looked so happy holding Mary's hand. I can't ruin that. Maybe when they're older I'll confess. God forgive me." In another from 1992, Mary came to stay the weekend. She called me auntie and hugged me so tight I almost told her everything. I saw my baby's eyes in hers. I think God is punishing me by letting me love her this much but never claim her. By the time I finished the letters, I was shaking uncontrollably. Clara had carried this torment her whole life. Every visit, every glance, every hug was a cry for forgiveness she couldn't voice. I closed the box, tears streaming down my face. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I whispered into the empty room. "We could have fixed it. We could have healed." But it was too late. The dead don't answer. Still, holding those letters brought me a strange comfort. For the first time, I saw not a monster, but a woman destroyed by her own longing. I realized that grief had shaped both of us. We were victims of love gone wrong, of silence mistaken for kindness. That night, I sat by my window, watching the moonlight fall across the garden. I whispered into the darkness, "I forgive you, Clara." The words felt heavy but right. I didn't say them for her. I said them for me. Because forgiveness wasn't about excusing her. It was about freeing myself. And as the wind brushed through the trees, I swear I heard her voice soft, trembling whisper back, "Thank you." The next morning felt strangely lighter, as if a weight I had carried for decades had finally lifted a little. Forgiveness, I realized, Isn't a single act it's something you wake up and choose again each day? I went about my morning routine slowly, making tea, feeding the cat, watering the little rose bushes outside my window. The world looked the same, yet something deep within me had shifted. But peace doesn't come easily to the living, especially not when the past still has unfinished business. A week after I found Clara's letters, I received another unexpected visitor, Grace's husband, Daniel. A quiet man with kind eyes, he stood at my door holding a small photo album. "Grace thought you might want this," he said softly. "It's from her childhood. She wasn't ready to give it to you herself yet." He placed it on my table, then hesitated. "She's been struggling," he admitted. "She says she feels guilty for loving both of you, like she's betraying her mother by forgiving you and betraying you by missing her." I nodded slowly, my chest tightening. "I understand. She's torn between two worlds that shouldn't have existed." He gave a faint, sad smile. "She gets that strength from you, I think. You both have the same eyes when you talk about the past, haunted, but strong." After he left, I sat down with the album. The cover was worn, its edges frayed from years of handling. I opened it gently, my breath catching at the first photograph. Grace as a baby, wrapped in a pink blanket, her eyes barely open. Clara was smiling, radiant, her arms wrapped around her like a woman who'd finally found what she'd been searching for. I stared at that picture for a long time, my emotions a tangled mess of love, envy, and pity. Then came the next photo, Grace, on her 5th birthday, icing smeared on her cheeks, Clara kneeling beside her with tears in her eyes. I could almost hear her voice whispering, "Happy birthday, sweetheart," pretending for one more year that she deserved to say it. I turned the pages slowly, one by one, each picture telling a story I wasn't part of. It hurt, but I kept going. Because if this was all I had of those lost years, I wanted to know them. I needed to. Halfway through, a photograph stopped me cold. It was a picture of a picnic, the whole family, including me, Thomas, Mary, Clara, and Grace. We were all smiling. Grace was about 7, sitting beside me, holding my hand. I remembered that day the way she'd climbed into my lap and called me Aunt Annie. I'd felt such warmth, such connection, that even then I'd joked, "You're like one of mine." Clara had gone quiet for the rest of the afternoon. Now, looking at that photo decades later, I understood why. I pressed the photo to my chest and sobbed, letting 40 years of pain pour out of me. That evening, I called Grace. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice tired but gentle. "Hi, Mom, sorry. I mean, Anne." "It's okay," I said quickly. "You can call me whatever feels right." There was a pause. Then she whispered, "I want to see you." When she arrived, she looked fragile, her eyes swollen from crying. "I went through Mom's things," she said, sitting down. "I found her diaries. She wrote about you almost every week, how she'd watch you from afar, how she envied your kindness, how she felt trapped in her own lie. She loved you, Anne. Twisted as it was, she did." I nodded, tears burning my eyes. "I know. I believe that now." But love without truth becomes poison, and it poisoned all of us. She took a deep breath. Do you think we'll ever be okay? I reached for her hand. Maybe not the way others are, but maybe we'll build something new from what's left. You, me, and Mary. 3 women bound not by lies anymore, but by the truth we survived. She smiled weakly, her thumb brushing over my knuckles. She used to hum that old lullaby you loved. Hush, little baby, she said softly. Said she learned it from you. She didn't tell me why it made her cry every time. I laughed quietly through tears. I sang it the night she was born. I didn't know it wasn't her. For a long moment we just sat there in silence. 2 generations of pain, finally meeting somewhere in the middle. Later that week, I decided to visit Clara's grave for the first time since the funeral. I brought a single white rose, her favorite. The cemetery was quiet, the air heavy with the smell of rain-soaked earth. I knelt beside her headstone, tracing her name with my fingers. Clara, I whispered, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I can't live carrying this weight anymore. I hope you've found peace. And I hope you're watching us now because your daughters are finally finding theirs. A soft breeze brushed across my face, and for a fleeting second I could almost hear her laugh, light, distant, familiar. When I turned to leave, Grace and Mary were standing a few feet away. They'd come without telling me, each holding a flower. Grace placed hers beside mine. Mary hesitated, then did the same. For the first time, the 3 of us stood together, 3 women linked by one story that had nearly destroyed us, but also, in a strange way, bound us forever. As we walked back to the car, Mary slipped her arm around Grace's shoulders. It was awkward, hesitant, but it was a start. I followed them, feeling a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt in years. Maybe this was what healing looked like, not forgetting, but forgiving, not erasing, but understanding. That night, as I sat by the window, I looked up at the stars. Somewhere up there, I hoped Clara was watching, and I whispered one last time, "It's over now, sister. We're okay." The next morning, Grace called. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice lighter than before. "What if we all went to the old house, the one where you and Mom grew up?" My breath caught. That house had been abandoned for years, but maybe it was time. "Yes," I said softly. "Let's go." We planned it for the next week, our first real family trip together. It felt strange, exciting, and terrifying all at once. Maybe the walls of that old house still held the laughter of 2 sisters before the world turned them into strangers. Maybe inside those walls we could leave the pain where it belonged behind us. As I hung up the phone, I smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. The story wasn't over yet. It was finally beginning again. The day of our trip came with a soft drizzle, the kind that made everything look washed clean and nostalgic. The 3 of us, me, Mary, and Grace, drove in silence for most of the way, each lost in our own thoughts. The road to our old family home wound through the countryside, past fields that had turned golden with the season. I hadn't been there in nearly 4 decades, not since before Clara and I drifted apart. When we finally pulled up to the old house, my breath caught. The paint was peeling, the roof sagging, and weeds had claimed the front garden. Yet, beneath the ruin, I saw fragments of our childhood, the swing Clara and I had built from an old rope, the stone path our father laid with his bare hands. It felt like stepping into a memory that had been waiting all this time for us to return. We walked through the creaking door, the air thick with dust and echoes. Grace looked around slowly, her eyes wide. "So this is where you and she grew up?" I nodded. "Every corner has her laughter in it. And mine." Mary ran her fingers over the old piano near the wall, pressing a few keys that croaked out a broken tune. "I can't believe this place is still standing." I smiled faintly. "It's stronger than it looks, just like us." We wandered from room to room, each step stirring old ghosts. The living room still had the fireplace where Clara and I used to sit reading stories by candlelight. The kitchen window was cracked, but I could still picture our mother standing there, humming softly as she cooked. In the hallway, Grace stopped at a faded photo still hanging on the wall, two little girls, arms around each other, smiling with missing teeth. "That's you two?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "We used to think we were inseparable." She stared at the picture for a long time, then whispered, "She must have loved you so much to want to be you." That sentence pierced me deeper than any accusation ever could. We climbed upstairs, the wooden steps groaning under our weight. Clara's old room was still faintly scented of lilac, her favorite. On her dresser sat a cracked jewelry box. I opened it gently, and inside were two small trinkets, a dried flower and a photograph of the two of us as teenagers. On the back, in her handwriting, it said, "No matter what happens, you'll always be my sister." Tears blurred my vision. "Even in the end, she never stopped being my sister," I murmured. Grace wrapped an arm around me, silent but steady. Mary stood behind us, her expression softening, as if she, too, finally saw the tragedy in its full shape, not just betrayal, but love turned to poison. We spent the afternoon cleaning the place, sweeping the dust, opening windows, letting in air that hadn't touched those rooms in years. By evening, the house felt almost alive again. We sat together in the living room, a small fire crackling in the old hearth. Grace broke the silence first. "Do you ever think about what life would have been like if none of this happened?" I looked at her, then at Mary. "All the time," I admitted. "But then I think maybe we needed to live the lives we did to find each other like this. Pain changes people, but sometimes it brings them together too." Mary smiled faintly. "I used to think of her as just my crazy aunt," she said quietly. "Now I realize she was just broken. She was," I whispered, "but we all are, in different ways." For the first time, laughter replaced the tears. Soft, hesitant at first, then full and warm. Grace told stories about her childhood with Clara, how she'd once tried to make pancakes and nearly set the kitchen on fire. Mary shared how I'd made her wear matching dresses every Christmas until she was 10. The two of them laughed, trading stories from two lives that should have been one. The light outside faded into gold, then purple, then deep blue. The fire crackled softly, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace, true, quiet peace. Later, as the night grew colder, We stood outside under the stars. The sky stretched wide above us, endless and forgiving. "I think she'd like this," Grace said softly. "Us being here, together." "I know she would," I replied, looking up. "Maybe she's watching now, finally free." We stayed there for a long time, saying nothing, just breathing in the night air. The past was still there, it would always be, but it no longer ruled us. When we finally got back into the car, I took one last look at the house. The moonlight caught the window of Clara's room, and for a split second I could almost see her there smiling, waving, her eyes full of the sisterly love I remembered from before everything went wrong. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe it was forgiveness taking form. Either way, it brought me comfort. The drive home was quiet but warm. Grace rested her head against the window. Mary hummed softly in the back seat, and I just kept driving, my hands steady on the wheel. The road stretched ahead, long and open, and for the first time, it didn't feel lonely. When I got home that night, I sat by my old writing desk and opened my diary, the one I'd kept since 1979. On the last page, I wrote, "She stole my baby. Yes, but she also gave me another. Love and grief came from the same heart, and now both have come home. I forgive her. I forgive myself. The circle is closed." Then I closed the book. The years since have been gentle. Grace visits often with her children. They call me Grandma Annie and fill the house with laughter that used to be missing. Mary comes too, bringing her stubborn warmth, still protective of me, still my girl in every way that matters. Sometimes the three of us sit on the porch together, sharing tea and stories as the sun sets, and I think this is what healing looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Every October, on the anniversary of that night in 1979, we visit Clara's grave together. We bring flowers, white lilies, her favorite, and stand quietly as the breeze stirs around us. We don't cry anymore. We just smile, remembering her not as the woman who broke us, but as the sister who, in her own broken way, loved too much. As I grow older, I've learned that life isn't about what's taken from us, it's about what we find after the storm passes. And though my story began in pain and betrayal, it ends in something softer, something stronger: love. Not the perfect kind, not the easy kind, but the kind that survives everything, because in the end, I lost a daughter but found two. I lost a sister but gained understanding. And somewhere between those losses and discoveries, I found myself again. And that, I suppose, is the real miracle.